everyone, in this video we're going to discuss the different types of customs charges. When people talk about paying for customs, they're really talking about a few different types of charges, and we have found it helpful to group them into three categories. The first is customs clearance charges, the second is customs duties, and the third is any charges that result from exams or penalties. We'll get into them one by one. One thing to note is that depending on how you're booking customs, the exact procedure for paying these fees might differ a little bit, but we wanted to familiarize you with all of the different fees you might run into. And in a later video, we'll talk about how to book customs on Freightos.com and how to pay all the fees in accordance with that process. Okay, so let's talk about customs clearance fees. We can use this term customs clearance fees to include all the charges for clearing customs aside from the actual amount of duties you'll owe. These are fees you can almost always calculate in advance. For example, any processing and maintenance fees charged by the US government. There's also the broker's fee, right, which is the fee that you pay your broker for dealing with the paperwork, the legalities, paying for customs. There's also the fee for the ISF if you're shipping by sea. There are also fees for goods that are subject to any type of government regulation. For example, if you need to file your goods with the FDA, you'll have a filing fee for that. So for all of these types of charges, you'll be able to find out the amount you'll owe in advance. Another charge is the customs bond, right? A bond is essentially an insurance policy for customs and border protection that they'll be paid their import duties and taxes in the unlikely event that you can't. It's required on almost all shipments. So there are two types of customs bonds. The first is a single entry bond, which, as it sounds, is a bond taken on a single shipment. If you ship very infrequently, this is probably the choice for you, but keep in mind that a single entry bond is calculated based on the value of your cargo. So the more expensive your goods are, the more expensive the single entry bond will be. The second type of bond is a continuous bond or an annual bond, which covers all of your shipments for a year. So usually that's going to be more cost efficient if you ship more than 3 or 4 times a year. It might also make sense to use a continuous bond for a single shipment if your goods are very expensive, because as opposed to the single entry bond, which is calculated based on the value of your goods, the continuous bond is a flat fee and won't change even if your goods are very expensive. So that's the customs bond. Just like other customs clearance fees, you will almost always be able to calculate this charge in advance. The second type of customs charges are the customs duties. This is the actual amount of taxes owed on your products based on its classification by HS code. This might also be impacted by where you're importing from and trade agreements and things like that. It's important to note that while the other fees we've talked about so far can almost always be calculated in advance, the customs duties are not calculated exactly until your goods actually arrive at the port. However, you can estimate them in advance. One way is to talk to your supplier, who should have experience in whatever types of goods you're importing and can give you a sense of how much you'll owe. You can also talk to your broker to get a sense of how much you'll pay in customs duties. There's one other type of charge that we want to discuss, and this is a type of fee that you hopefully won't have to pay most of the time, and that's any charges that result from exams and penalties. So first, customs exams or customs inspections happen in about 3 to 5% of shipments. So your goods might be selected for a customs exam. Most of the time they will not. This can happen no matter how you ship your goods, FCL, LCL, or air. Charges that shippers have to pay for exams include the actual exam and for any storage of your goods while the exam is taking place. And then, of course, there are any penalties that you might owe for errors or for non-compliance, but this should be very rare, especially if you're working with a good broker. Getting stopped for an exam can be really frustrating. That's because you can't predict when it will happen, and you also can't predict how long it will take, and getting information about how long your goods will be held is almost impossible, even for freight forwarders. So it can be really frustrating, but keep in mind that it won't happen most of the time. While there's no foolproof way to avoid customs exams all the time, our best advice is to get your paperwork in order, make sure your classifications and compliances are in order, and make sure to work with partners you trust, including your supplier, your freight forwarder, your broker, your freight booking platform, right? Make sure that the people you're working with are people that you can trust. So hopefully this video made customs charges and fees a little bit clearer. So again, we have clearance fees, which you can calculate in advance. We have customs duties charges, which you can estimate in advance. And we have exam and penalty charges, which you won't have to pay most of the time.